such a mistake would never happen to them. This story informs what, in my opinion, is the psychological aspect of why Nintendo is so overprotective. Nintendo as a company has a core traumatic memory from its childhood, one which its leadership internalized deeply. There is, however, another aspect as to why Nintendo is so overprotective of its intellectual property, and that is the legal side. To explain why Nintendo acts as it does, I'm going to break down the legal aspects into three parts. 1. What Nintendo actually owns, IP-wise. 2. What Nintendo fears will happen to its IP. And 3. Finally, why Nintendo feels it's necessary to take such extreme steps to protect its IP. So let us begin with part 1. What Nintendo has. To understand why Nintendo is so fierce in protecting its intellectual property, we must first understand what it is that Nintendo actually possesses. I want you to first consider a different media company, the final boss of intellectual property. Let's take a look at the Walt Disney Company. Disney is a massive company. You don't need me to tell you that. It is the number 46th largest company in the world by market cap. It owns some of the most valuable media franchises in the world. The titans of profitability like Princesses, Star Wars, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and Mickey Mouse himself. Now let's ask this question. How much are these franchises worth? It's hard to measure that, right? But one way we can attempt to measure the worth of a franchise is in how much revenue it generates, how much money it makes in the aggregate. Now, Wikipedia, though not usually the best source, has some pretty useful and reliable figures in this respect. We can see here that the Disney Princess franchise has a total revenue of $46.4 billion. That's an incredibly large amount. It's $5 billion more than the GDP of the entire country of Serbia. What about the mouse himself? Well, Mickey Mouse and Friends has a total revenue of $82.9 billion. Now, when you consider that the Google trademark is estimated by Forbes to have a value of $44.3 billion, and that Microsoft's trademark is valued at $42.8 billion, you start to understand how titanic these numbers truly are. Disney's $46.4 billion and $82.9 billion franchises are not to be sneezed at. But what if I told you that Mickey Mouse is not the media franchise with the highest revenue? Can you guess which media franchise number one slot might be? Well, the answer is Pokemon. Pokemon has the highest total revenue of any media franchise in the entire world, and it is not even close. Mickey Mouse and Friends has earned $81 billion since its inception in 1924. Pokemon has a total revenue of $110 billion with an inception date of 1996. Mario has a total revenue of $7.5 billion since 1981. And that figure doesn't include Donkey Kong, which has produced $5 billion on its own. The Legend of Zelda's total revenue is recorded at $4 billion, but that does not include merchandising.
Why Albedo?
Nintendo has some of the world's most valuable media franchises under its belt. Nintendo is sitting on top of an unspeakably large gold mine. You ever ask yourself just what Game Freak and Nintendo are doing with Pokemon? Now, if they so desired, they could be doing so much more in unrelated content. Different kinds of RPGs or adventure games, Tamagotchis, there's so many things, right? And even with the meager amount that Game Freak and Nintendo have done, what fans often complain about as being the bare minimum, Pokemon has generated more than 2,000 complaints.
Coming at ya!
Feel this ancient power!
With this understanding, we have the first sense of this concept. Know that Nintendo is without
Coming at ya!
and there's more resemblance to Disney is to so
Watch out! A proper send-down from the speed.
figures.
Coming to be! Witness my great
Imagine
undertaking!
for a moment that you are a member of the upper middle class, but not unspeakably wealthy. You live in a nice place, neighborhood, but life still has its struggles.
Coming at ya!
Now one day, you discover that
Proper
one property
send-down
sits on top of
from
the
the
largest oil reserve in the world. and that it is all
Feel this ancient power.
Watch out!
strengths are sudden, but it fall. Companies and nations alike occupy
Burst forth.
Rubber send-up! From the Spino...
their heads at their valuable property. But the investment funds and so on medical cause, seeking opportunities to profit. Even if a few close calls, or it looks like the might lose everything but manage to survive by the skin of the see in the deep dark corners of
Rubber send-up! From the Spino...
Witness my great undertaking.
there are only
Live.
competitors circling awaiting the right moment.
Hey there!
Nintendo is sitting on top of that world. On top of that gold market. It knows this. Nintendo is also not about speaking a very big dog. It's very large.
Moment of birth.
By marketing
Rubber send-up! From the Spino with blood.
It's Nintendo's richest company in the world. Anyone who follows the knows the difference between the 200 people best player in a game and a player in the top 50 is enormous. When StarCraft 2 and Liberty came out, I was very briefly a top 200 player on the ladder. But arguable number one best player Maru I am not. And if Maru played me even at my prime, he could probably beat me in 100 out of 100 games, even with a substantial handicap. Such is the nature of competitive play. Big business is ranked competitive capitalism. And intellectual property is one of the most important arenas of combat. Other companies are constantly looking for holes in your defenses to take what belongs to you. Nintendo is a big dog. It's me and StarCraft 2 Wings of Liberty. But its primary competitors are Sony at rank number 122 and Microsoft at rank number 3. Google at rank number 4, Facebook at number 8, and Amazon at number 5 are looking very hungrily in Nintendo's direction. You can be assured that these mighty predators are merely waiting for opportunities. A million smaller scavengers, too, are looking to take their own bites of the prize. Nintendo does not have the sheer capital resources of Microsoft. It does not have the century of business infrastructure that Disney has. It does not have the massive government-supported credit to business intervention that Sony has. Nintendo has very much to fear and everything to lose. It is a company totally dependent on its franchises. In Nintendo's eyes, its franchises, these intellectual properties, are pillars that hold up the entire edifice of the company. Any damage to these intellectual properties whatsoever is damage that cannot be afforded, even if it's just some acid rain, corrosion, or chip damage. There is no measure of defense too unreasonable, as there is simply too much to lose. And it is ever so easy to lose when your opponents are quite so good. Nintendo is always playing defense because it must. Nintendo's giant war chest of cash reserves exist also not as offensive investment capital, but primarily as a massive defensive shell. And there is a reason why Nintendo acts so defensively. You see, the history of the corporate world is littered with the corpses of once promising companies that failed to protect their intellectual property. Nintendo itself has a razor close shame, and it has no desire to repeat that experience again. So now let's take a look at part 3. Why Nintendo acts
Astrologers
so
must
harsh.
rid themselves of material
But
desires.
before we begin,
Only by ridding
first,
oneself of clutter
a
can
word
one
from
see
our
the
friends
true world
at
around them.
Velcro Corporation.
Company was so successful. Everywhere you go, see scratching every passion. You say, grow. But even though this love, I had the last 40 years ago. Now no matter who else makes it, you still want to call it down. We're famous, but we're lawyers and it's causing us grief. Cause we're afraid. You broken, it's all here in the short people. And we know things because we are.
Fate is called as such, for it cannot be changed, nor can it be reversed. It
Thank
can
you,
only
Velcro.
but be
Very helpful.
accepted.
Now that we know what Nintendo has, and what it fears, we can finally ask why Nintendo acts so protective of its intellectual property. But to answer that, we need to talk about parallel universes. No, just kidding. I mean, we need to talk about the law, which is arguably more confusing. And specifically, I mean the laws of the United States. Of course, intellectual property law, Europe, and Japan are important as well. But the United States is a massive market, and intellectual property damage here is detrimental and precedential. It is foundational damage that Nintendo cannot afford. I'm also not going to get too deeply into the weeds of the law, for the sake of laughter. This was supposed to be a short video, but it has become quite long. If you're curious about the very specific details on how IP law works, let me know. I'll make a follow-up video where we can get in-depth on that topic. Let's start with a very quick primer on intellectual property law. Intellectual property is commonly defined as being creations of the mind used in commerce. The legal definition of intellectual property, or statutory intellectual property, SA, is defined as
Following orders.
its patents and patent applications.
Delves into destiny.
2. Its works as well as copyright and copyright.
Fate is upon you.
Illustration.
Torn to oblivion. Illusion shattered.
Rights and licenses. As noted in the final statement, rights and licenses.
I'm out of
Trade
here.
styles, trade dress,
As you wish, make me
service
back.
marks, and so on and so forth.
I
Other
summon
words,
thee.
patents, copyrights, and trademarks, and the concepts associated with those things. There are other facets here that are not known. For these three patents, copyrights, and trademarks, we are mostly concerned with copyrights and trademarks. To paraphrase the law, patent is an exclusive right to commercially exploit an invention in exchange for public disclosure of the invention. Think a new Nintendo console. A copyright is the exclusive legal right to produce and distribute, including sell, something one has made. And a trademark is a design used to distinguish the goods of one entity from those of another, and to indicate the source of those goods. In plain language, copyright is the right to copy something you've made to sell. A trademark is your symbol that makes the thing you invented different from other people's things. Let's illustrate this to nail the point home. Take a look at this game box. Intellectual property is Kirby. Nintendo gets to sell copies of this game, Kirby and the Forgotten Land, because it holds the copyright to Kirby. Kirby is distinguished from other 3D platformers by merit of it being a Kirby game that is a trademark. The game cartridge itself, as a technology, might be patented. For Nintendo, all three of these matter in varying degrees. You can think of the patent as being protection, actual design, technology. The trademark as being Nintendo's branding. The copyright as being the right for Nintendo to reproduce and sell what it makes of that.
Wow,
You might
there's a
notice
lot of
that
treasure
the
chests down here.
discussions surrounding other protections concern the topic of copyright. And yes, this is the mechanism by which Nintendo enforces its intellectual property rights. Nintendo says, you cannot make music channels using our copyright music. You cannot put scans of our strategy guides online without permission, and you cannot make videos without our approval. It is only naturally consumed, and it which stems from its overprotectiveness of copyright. And from that lens, none of Nintendo's behavior seems to be something. If you look at Nintendo's behaviors more
A
carefully,
reward on the road.
note that Nintendo's great concern is not that others are profiting off their exclusive right to sell
Time to clean up.
copyright.
I am the cutting edge of fashion. Lend me a hand. I must leave no stone.
This is
By
because
royal
intellectual property is a body of
Drop.
rights. Patents, copyrights, and trademarks are all separate rights that combine For some companies, protection of the patent is a more important aspect of the protection of trademark. For others, like Nintendo,
Dang it.
the value of a trademark
This was
is
well
well
done.
known. While of course the copyright represents
Has a good night show.
or patents. The trademark of value is the compromise. Copyright also is a substantial lesson. Consider which lost its trademark in the United States something called trademark parasitization. what we older sometimes call genericized.
Delicate as
They are
silk.
failed to enforce properly associated brand, trademark,
Shadow
and
Raven.
with the specific
Steady as stone, as a beautiful maid will.
companies call their product aspirin, and they are failed to take action. Thus, since every consumer associated aspirin is being verified, not trademarked,
So this
Bayer
is what
lost
you
its
like?
exclusive right to name the medicine aspirin in the United States and profit exclusively on the product. For a pharmaceutical company like Bayer, though, while this might be a substantial blow, it is not the end of the world. For a media company like Nintendo, which is built upon the success of its trademarks almost exclusively, this is a danger to be avoided at any and all costs. As we saw before, Nintendo's revenues are generated by their brands, their media franchises, their trademark. What we are seeing is merely as best attempted.
Why
Don't have
would
maps.
you
Like Nintendo,
fucking
media
do that?
affecting their trademarks ferociously. Any damage to those trademarks is fundamental to the foundational value of the
Leave it all to me.
Nintendo does not want to end up like a person. Nintendo does want to end up like a bear. Nintendo knows everyone wishes by having Pokemon high, such as Digimon, Monster
Has a
Rancher,
good night,
Dragons,
sure.
monsters, all kinds of indie games, Yokai Watch, etc. What is Zelda? Zelda likes opportunity. Nintendo has something that's called you.
Lend me a hand.
Nintendo itself is actually genericized. It has no necessity of language. Everybody's mother used to call any video game console a Nintendo. A big
Oh, and
question,
these work.
I'm sure many of you are asking, is really this complicated? Isn't a much simpler and easier explanation just that Nintendo is going to want you to buy what it uses and uses its services? It doesn't want no problems or reproductions of its content because it wants to sell them to us isn't that the obvious answer? Which I will say you are right in one respect. It is absolutely all about profit. To a certain extent, yes. Nintendo might want to sell you some of the things that's taken down instead of having you write a print. But the profit, and most importantly, property that Nintendo might stand for, is incalculably more valuable inside each holds and next strategy. Nintendo is not afraid to understand
Someone needs assistance.
for their ability to sell it later. Nintendo is afraid that posting of Sega that permission is acting as
Little
calculus
dusty.
on their waterfalls,
Give it
as
a spring
termites
cleaning.
their foundation, as erosion on their beachfront, as a straw on its back. Nintendo is acting primarily out of fear for its intellectual property, and a distance secondarily out of trying to go and dine. Nintendo would, if it could, manage its community more closely to permit some fan works or allow certain lesser evils to persist that might otherwise provide free market. But its edifice is too large already, its intellectual property is too hungry, its resources stretched too thin to commit to this kind of community micromanagement. A company like Microsoft can maneuver more carefully due to its enormous manpower and resources. A company like Sega can maneuver more carefully due to the much smaller scale of its IP. But Nintendo has neither of these advantages, and so out of necessity treats every identified threat as a harmful one. There's a great deal more legal complexity, all of which pertains to trademarks and the interaction between copyrights and trademarks that I haven't gotten into in this video. What you need to know, though, is that ultimately, though, copyright protection is something that Nintendo cares about. The harshness with which it enforces
I just
its
realized.
copyrights is not
Leave it
so
to
much about the dollar it needs in making. About the $100 they
I should be
stand
here
to lose.
instead.
Copyright is used as the bludgeon, but it is not Nintendo's actual concern.
Such fair weather.
My mind, I'm a gamer. But in my heart, I am a gamer.
Have you ever noticed how almost every channel associated with video games seems to use video game soundtracks with relative imagery? I've used music from all kinds of different video games in this video, all of which are focused on many game features, specifically some game soundtracks for YouTube videos and streaming. But there's no that it's relatively pointless to Nintendo could allow
My royal
no one understands its
It's a good night show.
Now wait, that was absolutely insane. It already does this to some extent. By either allowing or not enforcing its copyrights on music in YouTube videos like this one. Nintendo's leadership for a long time has been developer-driven. You know, though, these were meant of vision, not of business. They experienced the Donkey Kong lawsuits, and they experienced being a very small fish in a great pond. They were not businessmen, they were developers doing business. And so their leadership treated the intellectual property side of things without nuance. Now the corporate leadership at Nintendo is now much more business-oriented. Some of the changes that will come may not be consumer-friendly, but will be very profitable for our friends at NTDO Live. With these changes, however, I would expect will come a more business-savvy legal department, one which may be more willing to play along the borders of intellectual property law to build consumer goodwill, instead of coming across as overprotective. This is not a guarantee, but we are already seeing a few moves in this direction. The Universal Studios theme park, for example, being a rather uncharacteristic move for Nintendo, and with the new Mario movie, doubly so. With this context,
Darkness! I am the cutting edge of fashion!
protect themselves
I must
from
leave
the
no
internet,
stone unturned as it
or otherwise that Nintendo sees us. Before I answer this, let me first state for terms that nothing in this video is really proves that I am not the world leader. Let's say you are hypothetical archives to preserve a hypothetical 25-year-old strategy.
Let's go! As a good night show!
A completely hypothetical.
Crumble apart!
Well, if your interest is in the archive of such documents, not in the display of such archive it, share archives organizations don't digitally reproduce it on the internet for the public. That's a bit silly, though, isn't it? What's the point in archiving a 25-year-old strategy guide if nobody can look at it? The most obvious step then is to ask for permission. You know, it's annoying. You have a strategy guide. You want to archive and share it. Nintendo might not ever respond, but you should still try. It doesn't hurt. You may even find Nintendo shares your interest in alteration. Or you may discover a legal, potentially contractual reason why
Shadow Raven! Delicate as silk!
a lot of sense. Your hands are
Steady
bound.
as stone, as a dutiful
The
maid.
copyright will be shared from the party and some
I'll catch up!
You may even find that some archive organizations have permission to display such work. And their trusts the alien history of
By royal
intellectual property much more than
As a good night show!
For example, you could, of course, also
Wings
say,
of darkness!
no pain, no harm.
Another test subject.
Nintendo something or someone they don't even know exists. Now, can they? But what about Finity? Well, remember that Nintendo's primary concern in protecting its IP is its trademarks, and secondarily, its right to distribute them. If you want to borrow, say, Nintendo's platforming mechanics, or its game design, that's not something the big head needs to have a problem with. Just don't use its copyright characters and don't use its trademarks.
I am the cutting edge of fashion!
Leave
it all to me. Time to clean up.
It's
Oz reveals a crumble apart!
This is not the
Starfall!
story of seasons. This isn't the Breath of the Wild. It's rising, it's Genshin Impact. You can call it a tribute.
Shadow Raven! Let...
Just don't do one more.
I'll catch up!
As that implies that Nintendo's intellectual property belongs to the party.
Shade!
They will not remain kindly.
By royal decree!
And of course, the idea of one is to try and commercially exploit material that is, in fact, Nintendo's intellectual property. This kind of activity is by far the most damaging to trademarks. Nintendo often doesn't even go after copyright violations that don't have some avenue of commercial exploitation, which includes self-promotion. You're thinking the MCA copyright takedowns are bad. I can assure you that lawsuits are much worse. And unfortunately, this is just how it is. This is how intellectual property law requires Nintendo to function. It's not unreasonable behavior. It is the only reasonable.
Ad Astra.
Nintendo, like almost any company, cares most about its profits.
Ad
Its
Astra.
actions seem overprotective to us
Thank you for
as
completing.
consumers because these actions appear to detract from our ability to experience the intellectual properties that we love the ways that we want to enjoy them, be it through fan tribute games, music remixes, or archived historical materials. Nintendo is a top 300 company. Intellectual properties of the top 50 companies in the world would do almost anything to get. Nintendo's decision-making must take into consideration their limited capital, limited manpower,
Damn it.
limited reach.
I forgot about
These
these.
factors are also why Nintendo's online game manufacturing, their Switch eShop, other such consumer-facing operations seem so behind the times. Nintendo does not have the resources to commit to these things at the level of Microsoft or Sony. But faced then with trying to guard an invaluable intellectual property treasure against very powerful groups who have an interest, not just in
Pause, reveal
themselves, but just in intellectual property rights.
Steady
Nintendo
as
has
stone.
everything to lose, with sufficient resources to afford the nuance necessary distribution and usage. Its intellectual property at the molecular level as its fans want it. Intellectual property laws in the United States are finicky in just such a way that any little damage to the evidence of an item will problems down the road. And so Nintendo
Nice, this is my first time getting these.
taking an inherently overprotective, very harsh approach at this for the time being. Nintendo is fiercely protective of its copyrights because it needs to be in order to protect its trademarks. And the entire value of its company is in its brands, its trademarks. So this episode turned out much longer than I had expected. I hope, though, that you found it informative. If you have any questions, please leave a comment. I will do my best to answer. I've purposefully tried to keep the legal side of this episode a little bit.
Good exploration requires new information, and in tabletop RPGs, all information is filtered through the games. There are many ways we can improve our environmental descriptions, such as reading more or using all the senses, but that takes both time and effort. Things we game masters love to circumvent. So here's 2 techniques and 1 tool I use for my environmental descriptions. Maybe they will help you as much as they help you. Tabletop RPG play is like passing a ball back and forth between the game master and their players. You toss the players some information.
I created another universe and founded paradise.
You then toss
I,
back
Fischl, and the princess
and
and
the consequences of their actions or further details to their missions. A bad example of this would be walk into a tavern. What do you do? This description is too fuzzy because everyone at the table is going to be imagining a different tavern. And while perhaps the number of tables, the placement of the bar, and the color of the wallpaper won't matter, the more fuzzy your description, the more questions you'll need to filter from the players before they'll feel comfortable actually do something too detailed. And if your prose is a little too much purple, you all might be imagining a similar tavern together, but half your players might answer about the description, while the other half are asking redundant questions to details you already mentioned 2 paragraphs. There's nothing wrong with a little more description to evoke a certain vibe. And in tabletop RPGs, you want to give the proverbial ball back to your players as quickly as possible, so they can start making their poor decisions. Let's create a room together to show you my process. Let's say we're making a haunted area for our players to explore. This room is a study that will contain several female.
I hear the voice of fate, speaking my name in humble supplication.
My go-to formula is to use 1 or 2 descriptors for the general scene. You're in an opulent bedroom. You enter an abandoned ransacked chapel. Or in the case of our example room, you walk into a gothic study. And if I'm feeling fancy in the moment, I'll add a sentence or 2 that evokes the other senses. Bonus points if I can incorporate the second trick to make the scene feel alive. Here, let me show you. When your eyes open, are instinctively drawn to movement. It's built into our survival. I set the scene, I always try to highlight something. Even in an empty dungeon room, I'll still point out a trickle of water from a crack in the wall. The dust rises and gently settles as you enter the threshold of this empty room. Flames flicker, leaves fall. The world should always be a perpetual.
I created another universe and founded paradise. For I, Fischl, and the Prinzessin
swaying from a. Now, my third quick tip to describe your world more betterly is to use a tool that provides over 10,000 different descriptions for monsters, places, items, characters, dialogue, or anything you might draw a blank on at the moment. Such as the sponsor for today's video, Describe. That's right, boys. We got the Describe sponsorship. Check it out. D&D tuber bucket list, baby. But for real, all the descriptive text Describe provides is just icing compared to their new Opus web app, which allows me to use their pre-made soundscapes full of ambient tracks, including music scores by Michael freaking Gill. You know, the ambient TNG music channel you throw up last second in your combats while you pray. Pray to cheese sauce. YouTube doesn't interrupt Michael's sick beat for the...
You're like millions suffering from erectile dysfunction.
Is it ad?
I do worry about the well-being of my retinue during my impromptu absence.
I'm sure the good people of the Adventurers Guild are absolutely fine, mein Fräulein.
Such a thing as
I created another universe and founded paradise. For I, Fischl, and the Prinzessin
Subscribe for sponsoring this video. With these tricks and tools, I still feel like my scenes and environments are too hazy for the players to comfortably explore. We need to present the capable materials in a way that'll get our players both curious and active in exploring the environments we've set up before.
I created another...
Make sure we give our players this landmark information and secret. I first learned this style of game design by Courtney Campbell over on his blog, /. But it really started clicking for me when I read Ian Hunter's featured article on Knock Issue 2. When I stopped in for information and things to be discovered, I first set up the landmarks, which is information that the
This realm is truly beginning to...
I tend to give out 3 or 4 pieces of landmark information at a time, usually around the number of player characters, so each one can examine a different landmark in a single exploration. I really want to purposely overwhelm the players, or in a more complicated way, this one, I'll put in even more landmarks. You walk into a gloomy gothic study, smell old parchment and pipe smoke as your eyes are drawn to the curtains swaying from the breeze. See the open itself, a large oak desk near them. A glass panel bookshelf that stands out among many shelves of books. A mounted elk near you. Ornate baby graveyard.
If you ever have any questions about the realm within...
Chestnut from against the fireplace. Finally, a shiny suit of armor. It's important. Yes, there are things here in this room that I did not want to. That doesn't mean they don't exist. That my players have this visual map, or we're playing this out in our heads. My players can still interact with
I created another universe and founded paradise. For I, Fischl, and the Prinzessin
There's something specific in this room that I didn't spell out. I either can say yes if it makes sense based on the scenario, no if it's something too far of left field, or maybe if I'm unsure. In which then I'll either have the players roll a check, or I'll give it a 2 in 6 chance of whatever they say. As to landmarks, how I lead my players towards
Just round it down to 1 and 3.
I avoid having them spend 15 minutes real time asking me to title all of the books in this studies library. Things like the couch, the rug, and the fireplace don't directly further the scenario I've prepared. While it's true that there is no such thing as set dressing in tabletop RPGs, I still need to guide my players towards the gameplay. As I said in the beginning, all information is filtered through the Game Master. I filter my world's information by combining the landmarks. I'm basically running a point-and-click adventure, where the stuff you can point and click on being the landmarks. I describe the landmarks in the room. My players decide which ones they individually want to examine and explore further. Now we're getting into what Anne calls hidden information, which is information that requires the player characters to actively examine or interact with the landmark, information. Anything that's behind, under, inside something is hidden information. Learning this information costs the player characters time and a bit of risk, because what's hidden can be either more underneath, treasure, or even a trap. In our example room, what's inside the glass panel bookshelf is considered hidden information. In my notes, I represent the transition from landmark to hidden information with a arrow. This is my players clicking on things, tossing the ball back to me to give them more information. Check out the chess set. The chess set appears to be set up. It looks like it's black.
I'm all for work-life balance, but I think this is pushing it.
Now we're getting into the third and final tier of information. Secret information is information that must be earned through either player character's abilities, such as skill checks, or by player skill. The person who's playing Red Fighter makes a connection with it. Right? In this particular situation, I could either say Red Fighter fails to notice any specific play Black can make, or I could go the extra mile and show my Red Fighter player what the actual chess match looks like, giving them a
Ready for
chance to
anything.
notice what I can do both. This too, Black Bishop could take the White Knight with zero risk. Now, how Red Fighter interacts with this chess set, if at all, will affect what happens to another piece of landmark information. In this case, the suit of armor. This is how I make traps and secret doors interesting to discover. I always make them hidden information, not secret. But arming the trap or discovering how to open the secret door is usually secret information. Bonus points if you can spread that information into 2 or more different landmarks. This is how I make information exciting for the players to discover. It also makes my notes way easier to reference at the table. And this is why mainstream adventures suck. Because they, well, I'll explain in this video. So how do you handle exploration in war games? Do you have a better method? If you want to see my complete notes for the study room use, check it out on my code page, and consider joining the Copy Masters Guild while dropping by. Thank you, all current guild members scrolling here. More content to come. But that's all I've got for now. See ya!
One is fast on one's feet. Try to keep pace.
The bond is strong. Flags up. And leap.
Continents almost resembled the world of today, but not quite. India was still a continent-sized tropical island full of lush rainforests and exotic life on its way to smash into Asia. But this paradise also hosted something else. The Deccan Traps, a volcanic region 1,000 kilometers wide and about to come to life in a dramatic fashion. The apocalypse began quietly and silently. About 800,000 years before the impact, the Deccan Traps began to exhale about 10 million tons of CO2 and sulfur dioxide each year.
Yourselves at home.
Which in the grand scheme of things was not much, so for a long time, no one noticed.
Quietly now. Here comes the cat.
These emissions wouldn't stop.
Dissipate.
They started
Strike is one.
to pile up in the
And
atmosphere.
step.
About 300,000
Roll.
years destroyed, the Deccan Traps started to vomit lava. This was it was lava a landscape of volcanoes stretching beyond the horizon. They were constantly active, releasing a steady flow of massive amounts of poison and lava, interrupted by much more violent and deadly eruptions. The lush paradise of India was the first victim, as gigantic clouds spread toxic fumes and poisoned the coastal regions. Clouds of ash darkened the sky as rivers of magma started massive wildfires, eradicating many local ecosystems and leaving the continent with dead dinosaurs. Still, at this point, it all looked like a local catastrophe, one of many that have hit our planet over its billions of years of history.
Our bond is strong.
Had it stopped here, there might still be dinosaurs today. But the nightmare hadn't even begun yet. The beast turns furious. The Deccan traps would just not stop spewing lava. And so, after hundreds of thousands of years of their precautions,
Gotcha.
became global. First, the experienced a wave.
Things are about to get dicey.
Everyone come here! The Temple of Wisdom! Break a leg!
But just about the time,
And step!
ecosystems jumped
I see everything!
the ground. They cheated
Our bond is strong.
while others
Just
copied
make
that.
her leap! And step!
So, initial warning, the deadly cooling followed, massively stressing that barely managed to adapt to the
And
hot
step!
temperatures.
Grow!
Get with me.
That was its brain policy of acidifying emissions became the factor, which was and still is today the basis of food web emissions. And if plankton disappears, the massive extinction is all but guaranteed. But now, the grand finale was about to begin. About 50,000 years before, in fact, the true apocalypse came. Like a cosmic horror breaking out of its prison, the Deccan traps roared and screamed and began to spew out tens of trillions of tons of magma and even more deadly gases in an onslaught that lasted for several thousand years, rolling over ecosystems, devastating everything they reached. For a time as long as all of human civilization was
Lightning, shower bomb. Here comes the catch.
Everyone come here! Share my knowledge!
Your grand finale. Unleash.
reaching almost 1,000 larger than 3 times more than the deadliest hurricane ever recorded by humanity. These storms were so massive and intense, they could reach tens of kilometers into the stratosphere and rip holes into the ozone layer with devastating consequences for all life now without protection from the sun's radiation. And of course, volcanic storms can lead to devastation and death.
Quietly now.
And if all this wasn't enough, the guts of
Busted.
the lost
Game's up. Fun's over.
Temple of Wisdom!
Get with me. Strike is one. And step.
Just crumbled a world around them collapsed. Some of the last dinosaurs had no Earth, they were dying vomiting toxic flow while being bathed in an acid rain. A cruel end for the members of an unknown family that had ruled the world for so long. Then it just ended. The frenetic eruptions slowed down and the endless natural disasters began to fade away. The world was changed forever. The monster had left unfathomable devastation and corpses in its wake. Even the planet's ecosystems far away were severely wounded. It was the end of a whole geological era. A burden started slowly and then turned loud and violent. And then it happened. Like a cosmic joke, on the other side of the world, a bright dot of light appeared in the sky. And an instant later, an asteroid 10 kilometers across smashed into Earth the power of 4 billion atomic bombs. If you want to see what this was like, we made a whole video about it. If life on Earth was like a murder victim barely holding on, this was the final blow. Just too much. After the massacre on the other side of the world, the Deccan traps went on expelling tens of trillions of tons of deadly gases for another 800,000 years, making sure that it was
Our bond is strong. Quietly now. Busted. Things are about to get dicey.
Break a leg! Just leave her alone. Share my knowledge!
Except birds.
Grow!
That's a shy reminder of how majestic and wonderful their larger cousins must have been. So, Who was the predator? Were the dinosaurs doomed by the traps, or would they have survived the event destroyed? Was it teamwork? Well, we don't know. Scientists have been fiercely debating this question for years, but for now we have no definite answer. The timeline of events that we've shown here is based on some of the most recent reconstructions of the evolution of the dead traps. There are other ones that paint a different picture, but right now, scientists are still fiercely arguing.